Diablo IV launched in June 2023 to the biggest opening in Blizzard's history. Record sales, record concurrent players, reviews that called it a return to form for a franchise that had spent years rebuilding trust after a rocky third entry. For about 3 weeks, it felt like the action RPG genre had found its new king. And then something happened. Players hit the endgame, and the conversation changed so fast and so completely that it became one of the most dramatic post-launch reputation shifts in recent gaming memory. 3 years later, Diablo IV is a genuinely different game than the one that launched in 2023. Multiple major patches, a full expansion, seasonal content, and fundamental reworks to core systems have transformed it in ways both positive and complicated. Evaluating it now means evaluating a moving target, which is either exciting or exhausting, depending on how you feel about live service games. But that story, the full arc from launch to where it sits today, is worth telling properly because it reveals something important about what this genre demands and what Blizzard was and was not prepared to deliver. Start with what the game does right at a foundational level, because the foundation is genuinely strong. The world of Sanctuary in Diablo IV is the darkest and most visually cohesive the series has ever presented. The art direction pulls heavily from dark fantasy and folk horror, with environments that feel genuinely oppressive without becoming monotonous. Fractured Peaks, the starting region, sets the tone immediately with snow-covered ruins, frozen corpses, and architecture that suggests a civilization that tried to hold something terrible back and failed. Each of the 5 main regions has a distinct visual identity, climate, and enemy type that makes traversal feel like moving through a world with real geography rather than a series of themed levels. The campaign narrative is the strongest story Diablo has ever told, and that statement holds up 3 years later. The main villain, Lilith, is a genuinely compelling antagonist because her motivation is not simply destruction or domination. She believes she is trying to save humanity from a cosmic war that humanity has no chance of winning by conventional means. Her methods are brutal and her logic is twisted, but the internal consistency of her worldview makes her more interesting than a villain who simply wants power. The cutscenes, particularly the opening sequence and several key confrontations throughout the main story, are some of the most technically impressive and narratively purposeful Blizzard has ever produced. The voice acting throughout is excellent across the board, with Lilith's performance specifically landing with a cold authority that makes every scene she appears in feel consequential. The protagonist is a customizable character across 5 classes at launch, which expanded later, and the personal character story is minimal by design. This was a deliberate choice to keep the player as a vessel for the world rather than a defined personality, similar to earlier Diablo entries. Whether that works for you depends on how much you need personal character investment to stay engaged with the story. The world building and the main narrative carry enough weight on their own that the silent or near-silent protagonist rarely feels like a gap. Combat across all classes is responsive, heavy, and satisfying in ways that the series has always understood. The barbarian feels physically powerful in a way that communicates weight with every swing. The sorcerer's elemental spells light up the screen with genuine visual feedback that makes damage feel real rather than numerical. The necromancer's army building creates a different kind of satisfaction, rooted in management and scale. Each class has a unique mechanic beyond its skills that shapes how you interact with the core combat loop. The barbarian uses an arsenal system, managing 4 weapons simultaneously. The druid draws from spirit resources that replenish through specific ability sequencing. These systems prevent the classes from feeling like reskins of the same template. The skill tree in Diablo IV replaced the deep passive trees of the second game with a more accessible cluster-based system. You spend points moving through nodes on a connected map with active skills, passive upgrades, and key passive slots at the outer edges. At launch, the system felt limited compared to what the genre had trained players to expect from deep build customization. This was a loudest criticism from the dedicated player base, and Blizzard heard it. The Paragon board system for characters who reach level 50 provides the deeper layer that the skill tree lacks, with a tile-based board offering passive bonuses, legendary nodes, and glyph sockets that give builds genuine identity at high levels. The combination of both systems works better than either would alone, but the full picture requires reaching endgame content that casual players may never see. The open world structure was one of the most discussed design decisions at launch. Sanctuary is a fully connected world with shared areas, random events, and dungeons scattered across its regions. World bosses appear on a schedule and require groups of players to tackle. Cellars provide compact challenge encounters. Strongholds are named locations held by powerful enemy factions that you can clear for permanent world changes and rewards. The density of optional content is high, and the quality is consistent enough that side quests rarely feel like padding. Some of the side quest writing is genuinely good, with small stories that add texture to the world without demanding attention they haven't earned. Here is where the honest post-launch conversation gets important. The endgame at launch was thin. Nightmare dungeons, the primary endgame activity, involved running the same dungeon formats repeatedly with increasing difficulty modifiers. The reward loop felt slow, and the build diversity felt constrained by how affixes and legendary powers worked. Season 1, which launched about 6 weeks after the base game, added a seasonal questline and battle pass but did not address the fundamental endgame issues. The community reaction was severe. Player counts dropped sharply. The criticism was specific and loud enough that Blizzard publicly acknowledged the problems and committed to significant changes. Season 2 marked a turning point. Vampire powers added a new layer of build interaction that created combinations the original system did not allow. Enemy density and endgame content increased substantially. The overall pace of leveling and progression sped up. Each subsequent season has added mechanics, quality of life improvements, and content that addressed specific complaints from the player base. The Vessel of Hatred expansion added a new class, a new region, and a new endgame pillar that gave dedicated players something to chase beyond the base game's systems. The game in 2026 is meaningfully better than it was at launch, but that improvement required players to stick around through a period where the game was genuinely not delivering on its potential. The technical performance story is largely positive. Launch had some server issues during the first weekend given the volume of players, but stabilized quickly. The game runs well across its supported platforms, and the crossplay implementation works without friction. Performance on current hardware in 2026 is smooth and stable. The visuals remain impressive, particularly the lighting and particle effects during large combat encounters, though the art direction does more heavy lifting than pure technical fidelity. The monetization model is the aspect that carries the most legitimate ongoing criticism. The base game at launch was priced at full retail. The seasonal battle pass requires additional purchase. Cosmetics in the shop are priced at a level that players consistently describe as aggressive. The expansion is a separate full-price purchase. For a game that requires a live service engagement model to deliver its best content, the cumulative cost over 3 years is substantial. This is not hidden or obscured, but it is real, and anyone considering picking up the full experience in 2026 should factor in the total investment honestly. Replay value for Diablo IV is high for the audience it's designed for, and low for everyone else. If the loop of building a character, pushing harder content, finding better gear, and refining your build is something that engages you, this game has hundreds of hours of content across its seasons and expansion. Each seasonal character starts fresh, which creates a recurring investment cycle that either feels like a fresh start or an exhausting reset, depending on your perspective. Hardcore mode, where character death is permanent, adds a layer of tension that transforms the entire emotional texture of the experience for players willing to engage with it. Diablo IV in 2026, accounting for everything it is now rather than what it was at launch, earns a 3.5 out of 5. The campaign, art direction, class design, and fundamental combat loop are strong enough to justify the score on their own. The endgame improvements over 3 years are real and meaningful, but the launch state was a genuine failure of preparation. The monetization model is consistently too aggressive for a premium-priced game, and the build depth still doesn't reach the ceiling that the most dedicated players in this genre want and have been trained by other games to expect. 3.5 feels exactly right for a game that delivers something genuinely special in certain areas and falls short of its own ambition in others. What Diablo 4's legacy will ultimately be is still being written. It reignited mainstream interest in the action RPG genre in a way that mattered. It told the best story in the franchise's history, and it demonstrated both the potential and the pitfalls of launching a live service game before the live service is actually ready. That combination of achievement and missed opportunity is what makes it one of the most interesting case studies in modern gaming, not just one of the most commercially successful. If this breakdown gave you something useful, leave a like on the video. Subscribe if you want more honest, long-form reviews where the final verdict is earned rather than predetermined. Share this with someone who is trying to decide whether Diablo 4 and its current state is worth the investment. And drop a comment telling me which class you played and whether the endgame kept you hooked, because that answer splits the community right down the middle, and I genuinely want to know which side you landed on.